The day I stopped laughing was the day everything changed. I want you to picture it. My mother-in-law, Darlene, standing in the middle of my kitchen in her cream-colored blazer, looking around like she was conducting a health inspection. Arms folded, chin up, eyes moving slow and deliberate across the countertops, the stove, the little 55-gallon aquarium I keep on the sideboard where my cichlids circle through the blue water without a care in the world. And then she turned to me and said it. Said it like it was the most reasonable question anyone had ever asked. "So you drove all the way here to check how I earn my husband's big paycheck by cleaning the house?" I asked her. She didn't even flinch, just tilted her head a half-inch and said, "Well, someone has to." I laughed. I genuinely laughed. Because what else do you do when a 64-year-old woman shows up unannounced on a Tuesday morning in early March and implies that your entire professional existence is a performance staged for her son's benefit? I laughed until my eyes watered, and then I looked at my husband, Craig, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, and I saw something on his face that killed the laughter dead. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't apologetic. He squared his shoulders, actually squared them, like he was about to deliver a verdict, and said, "While Mom's staying with us, you'll be handling dinner every night. She has dietary restrictions. I'll text you the list." That was the moment. That right there. 20 years. 20 years of marriage, and my husband stood in our kitchen and told me I'd be cooking for his mother like I was the help. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Darlene. Then I said something that neither of them saw coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because you need to understand what 20 years actually looks like before you can understand why that morning broke something open in me that I didn't even know was closed. I grew up in Clover Creek, a suburb about 22 miles outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where the HOA sends you a letter if your mailbox post leans 2 degrees past vertical. I've lived here my whole life, give or take 4 years at Ohio State. I came back because my mother was sick, and then she got better, and by then I had a job I liked and a man I loved, and leaving felt unnecessary. I was 23 when Craig and I started dating, 24 when we got engaged, 25 when we got married on a rainy Saturday in late April in the backyard of his aunt's house in Worthington with a rented tent and a bluegrass band that played surprisingly good covers. I am 43 now. Do the math. That's a long time to build a life with someone. My name is Nora Callahan, Nora Whitfield now, though I've been thinking about that lately. I'm a construction cost estimator, a senior one. I've been doing this work for 16 years, and I am genuinely good at it. I sit down with blueprints and material specs and subcontractor bids, and I tell developers and general contractors exactly what a project is going to cost before a single shovel breaks ground. My reports have saved clients hundreds of thousands of dollars. I work from home 3 days a week and drive into the office downtown the other 2. I bill at $95 an hour as an independent contractor on top of my salary, and in a good year, I clear close to $140,000. Craig is a regional sales manager for a medical device company. He makes good money too, around $160,000 with his bonuses. We are not rich, but we are comfortable in the way that 20 years of careful decisions makes you comfortable. We have a 4-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Lane, a manageable mortgage, 2 cars that are paid off, and a 401k that I check maybe too often. We also have 2 kids. Megan is 17, a junior in high school, sharp-tongued and brilliant, and currently obsessed with marine biology, which is probably why she's the one who actually maintains the aquarium with me. We set it up together when she was 9. Started with goldfish, graduated to cichlids over the years. There's a blue peacock in there right now named Ptolemy. Megan named him, who has survived 3 filter replacements and 1 catastrophic algae bloom that nearly took out the whole tank. He's magnificent. Our son, Dylan, is 14, quieter than his sister, spends most of his time building elaborate things in Minecraft, and occasionally emerging from his room to eat an alarming quantity of cereal. Craig and I, on paper, from the outside, looked fine. We looked like what 20 years is supposed to look like. We had dinner together most nights. We took vacations. We argued about normal things. whose turn it was to call the plumber, whether we needed to refinish the deck before summer, what to do about Dylan's grades in geometry. We had a rhythm. And rhythms can feel like happiness if you don't look too closely. The trouble, I understand now, started with Craig's brother, Garrett. 4 years younger than Craig, never quite landed on his feet in the way the family hoped, and possessed of a particular talent for making other people's stability feel like an insult to his own instability. Garrett had been living in Phoenix for the past 6 years, doing something vague in real estate that seemed to involve more talking about deals than actually closing them. He called Craig a couple of times a month. I never loved those calls. Craig always came out of them a little agitated, a little restless, like Garrett had scratched at something under the surface. But early March, the week before Darlene showed up, I noticed the calls were happening more. Every other day, sometimes twice in one day. I'd walk past the living room and Craig would be on the phone, voice low, and he'd either stop talking or wander toward the back of the house. I didn't interrogate it. I was in the middle of a massive estimating project for a mixed-use development in Dublin, and I had about 47 browser tabs open at any given moment, and a deadline that was making my left eye twitch. I didn't have bandwidth to wonder about my brother-in-law's latest scheme. Then, on a Thursday night, Craig sat down across from me at the kitchen table while I was eating leftover soup and going over a materials takeoff on my laptop, and he said, "Mom's coming to stay for a while." I looked up. "How long is a while?" "She needs to get out of her condo. There's been some mold remediation going on and the noise has been really hard on her. Probably 3 or 4 weeks." Darlene lives in a condo in Westerville, about 40 minutes from us. She is not a difficult woman in the dramatic sense. She doesn't scream or throw things. She operates through implication, through the pause before a compliment that makes the compliment feel like a criticism, through questions that are really statements. She has never, in 20 years, asked me a single question about my work. Not one. She knows I work. I think she knows that in the abstract, but the actual content of what I do has never once entered a conversation between us. I am Craig's wife. I keep the house. I raise the kids. That is, as far as Darlene is concerned, the complete picture. I said, "Okay. When?" "Monday." That was 4 days away. I nodded and went back to my materials list. Craig went back to his phone, and I told myself it was fine. 3 or 4 weeks. I could manage 3 or 4 weeks. People do harvesting than hosting their mother-in-law. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about yet, was that Garrett had been talking to Craig for weeks about something specific, something that had to do with me, something that, when I finally found out, made every single one of those friendly phone calls feel like a trap being assembled one quiet piece at a time. Darlene arrived on Monday with 2 large suitcases and a casserole dish she said was for getting us started, which I thought was a strangely generous gesture until I realized she expected me to heat it up for dinner that night. She settled into the guest room, rearranged the towels in the hall bathroom without asking, and by Tuesday morning was standing in my kitchen in that cream blazer, conducting her inspection. I was on my laptop at the kitchen table when she walked in. I had a site plan on the screen and was working through a concrete estimate for a parking structure. My coffee was next to me. The cichlids were doing their slow circles in the tank. It was 8:47 in the morning. I was already 2 hours into my workday, and Darlene looked at the table, looked at me, looked at the aquarium, and then looked back at me with that particular expression that meant a question was coming. "Do you work every day?" she asked. The way she said it, work, had about 8 letters. "Yes," I said. "I'm a cost estimator. I work on construction projects." She nodded slowly. "Craig mentioned you do some things from home." "I do some things from home, and 2 days a week I go into the office downtown." Another slow nod. Then she looked around the kitchen again, at the breakfast dishes still in the sink, at the permission slip Megan had left on the counter, at the stack of mail I hadn't sorted yet, and she said, "So you're here all day?" "I'm working all day," I said, carefully, precisely. She smiled. It was a small smile. "Of course." Craig walked in 10 minutes later, poured himself coffee, kissed his mother on the cheek, and that's when she said it. That's when she asked, in the most conversational tone imaginable, whether I was home all day keeping things up for Craig's salary. And I laughed, and Craig squared his shoulders and told me I'd be cooking dinner for his mother every night. I stopped laughing. I looked at my husband, this man I had built a life with for 2 decades, this man whose socks I had found on every floor of this house, this man who had held my hand through 2 labors and 1 miscarriage and my mother's cancer scare, and I said, very quietly, "I need to tell you both something." Craig frowned. Darlene waited. The cichlids kept swimming. And then my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen out of reflex. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. 6 words. "Ask Craig what Garrett told him. ****. I stared at those 6 words for probably 4 seconds, which is a long time to stare at your phone when your husband and his mother are both watching you. Ask Craig what Garrett told him. No name, no context, just that, from a number I didn't recognize with an Ohio area code I couldn't place. My stomach did something slow and unpleasant, like a gear catching wrong. I set the phone face down on the table. I wasn't ready to open that door yet, not in the middle of this kitchen, not with Darlene standing there in her blazer and Craig looking at me like I was about to make a scene. "You were about to say something," Craig said. His tone was careful, controlled. "I was," I said, "but I changed my mind, for now." I picked up my coffee, took a long sip, and looked at Darlene. "Darlene, I'd be happy to make dinner tonight. I'm a good cook. But I want to be honest with you about something, and I want you to hear it, okay? Not as Craig's wife, as a person." I set the mug down. "I am a senior cost estimator. I work full-time. I have deadlines, clients, and a project right now that represents about a $4.2 million construction budget that my firm is responsible for getting right. When you walked in here this morning and implied that I earn Craig's paycheck by keeping the house, you weren't describing my life. You were describing a version of me that doesn't exist." Darlene's chin came up. "I didn't mean anything by it." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's actually the part that bothers me more." Craig shifted his weight in the doorway. "Nora, I'm not done," I said quietly, and something in my voice, maybe the fact that I wasn't yelling, wasn't crying, was just very still, made him stop. I waited until that evening to deal with the text. Craig was in the living room watching something on TV. Darlene had gone to bed early with a headache, and the kids were upstairs. I went to my home office, the 4th bedroom that I converted 6 years ago, with a real desk and a proper monitor and filing cabinets full of project specs, and I called the number back. It rang twice. A woman answered. "I figured you'd call," she said. Her voice was flat and tired. "My name is Sandra, Garrett's ex-girlfriend. We broke up about 6 weeks ago. I probably should have called you sooner, but I needed to figure out what I actually knew versus what I suspected." I sat very still. "Tell me." What Sandra told me took about 40 minutes and 2 glasses of water, because my mouth kept going dry. The short version, the version I could hold in my hands and look at, was this. Garrett had spent the last 4 months convincing Craig that I was hiding money. Not just hiding money, siphoning it. Garrett had apparently told Craig that my independent contracting income, the $95 an hour consulting I did on top of my salary, was going into a separate account that Craig didn't know about, and that I was building an exit fund. Garrett said he had proof. He'd told Craig he'd seen bank statements. He hadn't. He'd seen one screenshot of a Venmo transaction, completely out of context, that I'd sent to my college friend Deanna when we split the cost of a birthday gift for another friend, $230. Garrett had apparently spun that into evidence of a secret financial life. "Why?" I asked Sandra. "Why would he do that?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because Craig promised him money. If Craig initiated a divorce, there was going to be some kind of asset restructuring, and Garrett had convinced Craig to invest with him, in his real estate thing in Phoenix, but only if Craig could free up capital. And the easiest way to free up capital was to cut me out," I said. "Yeah." I sat there in my office with the monitor glowing and the filing cabinets full of 16 years of meticulous work. And I thought about Craig, about the phone calls every other day, about him squaring his shoulders in the kitchen, about him inviting his mother here into my home, a woman who had never once in 20 years asked me what I actually did for a living. I thought about how neatly it all fit together. A wife who just cleans the house is a lot easier to dismiss than a wife who clears $140,000 a year and has her name on half of a paid-off house and 2 paid-off cars and a 401k that she has been carefully building since she was 27. "Sandra," I said, "do you have anything in writing? Texts, emails, anything?" She had screenshots, a lot of them. She sent them to my email while we were still on the phone. I read through them until almost midnight. The next morning, I made exactly 1 phone call before Craig woke up. I called Patricia Osei, a family law attorney whose card I'd gotten from my coworker Renata 2 years ago after Renata's own divorce, and whose number I had never deleted because I am, at my core, a person who prepares for contingencies. Patricia had an opening at 2 o'clock. I went to the office that morning, one of my 2 in-office days, and I sat across from my monitor and I did my work. I finished the concrete estimate for the parking structure. I sent it to the project manager with a note about 2 line items that could be value engineered if the client wanted to reduce costs. I ate a sandwich at my desk, and at 1:30 I drove to Patricia's office in Worthington, 12 minutes from my house, and I sat across from a woman who had a law degree from Case Western and approximately 0 patience for nonsense, and I laid everything out. Patricia looked through Sandra's screenshots. She asked me questions about our joint accounts, my contracting income, how assets were titled. She asked whether Craig had ever made any financial moves I wasn't aware of. I said I didn't think so, but I'd been focused on a big project and hadn't looked closely at our joint checking in about 3 weeks. "Look tonight," she said, "and don't move anything yet. Don't close accounts, don't transfer funds, don't do anything that looks reactive. Just look." I looked that night. In the guest bathroom with the door locked on my phone at 11:15 p.m. while the house was quiet. Craig had transferred $18,000 from our joint savings to an account I didn't recognize. The transfer had happened 9 days ago. I lay in bed next to my husband that night, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought, 20 years. I thought about the rainy Saturday in late April and the bluegrass band and his aunt's backyard in Worthington, and holding his hand through 2 labors and 1 miscarriage. I thought about all of it. And then I thought about $18,000 quietly leaving our joint account while I was working 60-hour weeks on a $4.2 million project and trusting that the life I'd helped build was still the life I thought it was. I didn't cry. I was too far past crying. The confrontation happened on a Saturday. I chose Saturday because the kids were both out. Megan was at a marine biology workshop at Ohio State, something she'd been signed up for since January, and Dylan was at his friend Marcus's house. I needed the house to be empty except for the 3 of us. I made coffee. I set 3 mugs on the kitchen table. I sat down with my laptop open to 2 things: Sandra's screenshots, forwarded to a folder, and the bank statement showing the $18,000 transfer. I called Craig and Darlene into the kitchen. Craig came in looking like he expected an argument about dinner. Darlene came in looking like she expected to observe one. I turned the laptop to face them. "I want to talk about what Garrett told you," I said to Craig, "and I want to do it with your mother here because I think she deserves to know what her sons have actually been doing." Craig's face changed, the casual expression gone, replaced by something that was trying very hard to be composed and wasn't quite making it. "Nora, whatever you think you know, Sandra called me," I said. His jaw tightened. "Sandra sent me 47 screenshots of text conversations between you and Garrett going back to November." I tapped the laptop. "The conversations where Garrett tells you I'm hiding money, where you say, and I am quoting you directly, 'If what you're saying is true, I need to move fast,' where Garrett tells you to get mom involved, make it look normal. And then 9 days ago, $18,000 left our joint savings account. I'd like you to explain to your mother right now where that money went." The kitchen was very quiet. The cichlids moved through their blue water. Ptolemy did his slow, magnificent circle near the glass. Darlene turned to look at her son, and the expression on her face was something I hadn't expected. It wasn't defensive. It was the expression of a woman who was doing math she didn't like the answer to. "Craig," she said. Her voice was different, smaller. "What did you do?" He tried. He tried to reframe it, said he'd just been protecting himself, said I had been secretive about money for years, said Garrett had shown him things that made him worried. Every sentence he spoke, I opened another screenshot on the laptop and turned it toward him like a card in a hand I'd already won. "The account you transferred the money to," I said when he'd run out of reframes. "Patricia tells me that's considered dissipation of marital assets in Ohio. That's not my opinion. That's a legal term with specific consequences in a divorce proceeding." "You talked to a lawyer?" His voice was sharp. "I talked to a lawyer," I confirmed. "Her name is Patricia Osei, and she's very good." Darlene put her hand flat on the kitchen table. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "I didn't know about any of this," she said quietly. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to herself, or to some version of her son she was revising in real time. "I know," I said. "That's why I wanted you in this room, because you came here to check on me, to see if I was really doing enough, really earning enough, really being enough. And I want you to see clearly what's actually been happening in this house." I closed the laptop. I looked at Craig. "The $18,000 gets returned to the joint account by Wednesday. Patricia has already drafted a letter to your attorney, or whoever you decide to hire, outlining our assets and the terms I'm prepared to negotiate. I am not interested in a war. I am interested in a fair accounting of 20 years. But if that money isn't back by Wednesday, we skip the negotiation part and go straight to litigation, and I promise you that will cost both of us a great deal more than $18,000. He stared at me. I stared back. "I also think," I said, "that before you make any decisions, you should call Garrett and ask him directly what he was going to get out of this. Ask him what investment deal he had lined up. Ask him whose money he actually needed." I paused. "And then maybe think about what kind of brother does that to a family." Craig left the kitchen. Darlene stayed. She sat down slowly in the chair across from me and put both hands around her coffee mug and didn't say anything for a while. The cichlids kept swimming. Ptolemy passed by the glass like he owned the whole ocean. "I owe you an apology," Darlene finally said. "Not just for Tuesday, for a lot of Tuesdays." "I know," I said. "I appreciate that." The $18,000 was back in the joint account by Tuesday afternoon, one day early. Craig moved out of the house 6 weeks later, into an apartment in Gahanna. The divorce took 8 months, Ohio being an equitable distribution state, and me having Patricia in my corner, and the paper trail from Sandra being as clear as it was. It went about as well as these things can go. I kept the house. We split the 401ks. We worked out a fair arrangement for Megan and Dylan, who were, as it turned out, more resilient and perceptive than I'd given them credit for. Megan, when I told her, looked at me for a long moment and said, "Mom, I've known something was wrong for like a year." She was 17. Kids see everything. Dylan took it harder, but he came around. He still sees his dad every other weekend, and Craig is, to his credit, good with the kids, even when he's been terrible with me. Some things survive the wreckage. Garrett never got his investment. The deal fell through, apparently, because the capital Craig was supposed to bring never materialized the way Garrett had planned.